Welcome to this week's discussion of the article we sent out Friday. This article is entitled Perspective, and it's giving us a difference between our own perspective and how Yahweh's perspective is toward us. It goes into some pretty good depth, and we never cover everything in these discussions. So I would highly recommend that you read the article, follow the highlighted blue links to the supportive content that's in there, and see if this doesn't do something for your perspective. With me today is my co-host and friend, Jim Adams. Say hello, Jim.
Hi there, friends. I looked for a simple, quick way to introduce this article, and I think I found it. I've listened to preaching of two poles, the very liberal, where you can do whatever you want because you're under grace, and the other one is fire and brimstone, that you wonder if anyone can be saved. Well, this article does something different. In my opinion, it teaches the truth.
Well, that's wonderful. We really want the truth. You were giving me a question before we started. Why don't you go with that?
Yeah, in the opening two scriptures, in Genesis 26, it's Isaac is being spoken to here, and he's given the explicit instruction, do not go down to Egypt. And yet they end up there for 430 years. Two questions come to mind. Why was there a famine in the promised land? And was it gracious of the Father to warn them what would befall them?
Well, there have always been famines throughout the world. You know, Yeshua says that it rains on the just and the unjust alike. In the world, you're going to experience tribulation. That's just part of living. And so what the father was telling Isaac, if you continue with that verse, he says, don't go down to Egypt, but stay in the land of promise, and I will meet your needs. Essentially, I will take care of you. Now, when he was talking with Abraham, he said, your family will go down to Egypt for 430 years. That was not the father did not cause them to go down to Egypt. There was another famine in the land during Jacob's time. And Jacob chose not to wait on the provision of the father, but to go down to Egypt. Now, if you remember from articles past when we have dealt with prophecy, you'll remember that prophecy is not etched in stone. And prophecy is contingent on our response. If you remember the people of Nineveh, there was a prophecy that the father was going to destroy them if they didn't turn from their ways. Well, they did. They repented, as a nation. And the father changed his mind. He didn't fulfill that prophecy. The same thing is going on here with Isaac. Isaac listened to Yahweh and stayed in the land and was fed from the blessings of the land, from the blessings of Yahweh upon the land. When we get to Jacob, it's not so clear. I mean, he's being advised to go to Egypt. And rather than listen to the words of Yahweh, he goes. And as a consequence, they're in bondage there for 430 years. Now,
You know, that isn't exactly right. It just occurred to me when they first got to Egypt, they were doing very good. They were given a good pasture land, and their brother was, in charge of things. So there had to be a time when they did good in the land of Egypt. However, I do know how it ended, and I don't dispute that.
well, yeah, there was a time that they were graciously invited in and given the land of Goshen to settle in. But if they had just gone there to wait out the famine and then gone back, that would have been one thing.
Mhm.
But it was good down there. And so they stayed. And every time a pharaoh was changed, the disposition of the first pharaoh didn't change with them. And as you get into 2 or 3 pharaohs down, um, that pharaoh is looking upon them as he does other nations of the world as slaves, so he can build his empire. And that's what happened to them. They became um, slowly, bit by bit, incrementally, they went from being a free people in this land, um, welcomed and um, made to feel safe, that incrementally they moved into bondage. So
I have a scripture in my mind, and a Pharaoh arose who knew not Joseph, or something like that. But I have something more challenging for you. As I read in depth in this article, I realize there's a lot of talk about the Father tests us, wants to prove us. We go through circumstances. And I agree with you, but a lot of people are going to be surprised when you tell them the reason why he tests them is because he doesn't know the future. So take a bite of that.
well, he doesn't know the future just because he has given men free will and choice. And as long as we have free will and choice, he can hope, but he has no way of knowing what choices we're going to make in any circumstance along the way. We may start off real good like Solomon, but then he started making choices that caused him to drift off. Um, we're no different than he is. And so it's the reason it's not that he causes these circumstances to come upon us. It's like I said earlier, the rain falls on the just and the unjust. But when we're in those circumstances, what he's doing is he's watching us to see how we're going to behave. Are we going to be faithful to his words, or are we going to choose our own path? And in the last article that we did about fulfillment, we expounded on this situation quite extensively. That if we choose his words in whatever circumstance we find ourselves in, then we fulfill those words in this earthly realm. We bring them into this realm in this generation. And so how we behave, and sometimes it's it's not how we behave in the beginning of the circumstance, it's how we behave towards the end. The end has as much bearing on us, probably more so than the first.
My thinking on this whole thing has radically changed over, a matter of months. I used to hate the scripture to give thanks, in all circumstances. But as I begin to understand why the circumstances, it's getting easier to give thanks. And so that's been a blessing. Okay, I got another one for you. At the end, at the end of the second scripture, in the beginning, because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statute, and my laws. Where are they mentioned?
They're not. And that was 430 years before Sinai. So how did he know them? If they weren't given, how did he know them?
Well, he must have had pretty tight communication.
The answer is that he had a relationship with Yahweh that was very intimate. The reason it was intimate was because he came to know the nature of the essence of who Yahweh is. The core nature of that essence is selflessness. It's seen repeated over and over and over again in Yahweh's behavior toward us. And that's why when it came time for he and Lot to separate, he told Lot to pick whatever he wants, and he'd take what was left over. It's because that core nature of selflessness. Now that's not self-denial, but it's considering the things of my brother to be more significant than the things of my own. That's what we see Abraham doing with Lot. He was manifesting the nature of Yahweh toward his brother, his nephew. And we see that in his life repeatedly. And so there you have it.
Good enough. I have something else I want to bring. Surprise, surprise. This is a huge theological position, that why are we here? We are here to prove ourselves worthy or appropriate for whatever comes next.
I prefer to look at it as we are given a brief span of life on this planet to make choices that determine where we will be positioned with Yahweh in eternity where he abides.
Okay.
And those choices are made in the circumstances that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, in fact, you make an explicit statement further on. He is more concerned with the eternality of our spirit.
Of our being. He is more interested in the eternality of our being than he is in the immediacy of our circumstances.
Well, actually, it reads here our spirit, but I wanted to ask you about that.
Well, the reason it reads that on your paper is because you didn't refresh the article before you printed it out and did your audio. I corrected. That's one of the things I corrected.
Okay, I'm glad, because it brings up a question of nefesh or nemish or
Nephesh.
That whole question about spirit is too big to tackle right here unless we have time at the end.
No, it's not too big to tackle right here. Adam, when the Father breathed life into Adam, he breathed his spirit into Adam's nephesh. His nephesh is his being. when Adam disobeyed, that spirit died. Yahweh said, on the day you eat of the fruit of the knowledge of the tree of the between what's good and what's evil, you will die. Now, we covered thoroughly in the last article, he didn't physically die. He lived for another 930 years. So we have to refocus our attention on what death means from Yahweh's perspective. And that death is the death of that spirit of Yahweh that was within him. It was death, and he didn't have it anymore. That's why
wait, interruption. I understand that line of thought, but then you will go on next to say, however, there's been a spark in humans ever since.
There is within that blood, because the blood of Adam was passed on down to Noah, and it was from Noah and his three siblings, his three sons and their wives, that the entire earth was repopulated after the flood. So while Noah carried that corrupted blood from Adam, it was the blood that was spread all over the earth. And within that corrupted blood, even the corrupted blood, there is a spark of connection that will allows every person born since then to be able to have a brief interaction with the Father to see if they are willing to pursue truth with all of their heart, with all of their might. If they are, then that spark becomes enlarged until we get to the place where we receive that same breath of life that was spread abroad at Shavuot, and we get rekindled, re-energized, restored to that very place that Adam found in the garden in the beginning.
Okay. Further on, there's the station our spirit occupies in eternity. Let's just look at that.
Okay, well, again, you've got the before I corrected it.
No, I mean,
remember when I first wrote this article, I think it was 1917.
Forgive me, I meant to say being.
Okay.
I know you corrected it. All right. The station of our being. What's the evidence that we have a station?
Well, the station just merely means what is our proximity to the source of life, the source of light, the most brilliant of light that you can imagine, the purest. As we covered in the last article, fulfillment, we saw that Yahweh was a consuming fire, and that in order for us to participate in that light, we have to become pure as he is pure. And to the degree we allow ourselves to be purified by manifesting his behavior in our life, then the closer we are able to come, the closer in proximity we're able to come to the core of that light. And so people are stationed in various places according to how they have allowed his spirit to purify and cleanse them to become spirit as he is. 1 John 4:17 says, even as Yeshua is, so are we in this world. We become pure when we allow him, when we keep his words in every circumstance. The more and the longer we keep them, the purer we become, and we incrementally grow closer to how he is. And so when we die, when we're resurrected on that day of Yahweh, we will be resurrected in that station, in that position, in that proximity that we died in.
Okay,
Now,
hold there. This is troublesome, but I don't expect we can have to have closure right now. There's
well,
two
I
kinds
was
of
fixing to say that um, in the Tanakh, what's been renamed the Old Testament, there are several scriptures that I have found that leads me to believe that we're going to continue to learn of him for all of eternity. We will never be able to grasp the immensity and the purity of who he is. So it's going to be a constant process of learning.
Okay, that helps me out because my next question, what about the death of a 3-year-old? What opportunity has this 3-year-old had to establish his station? Now you're proposing that a person can change his station.
I'm just, that's what I've come to believe. Now, as far as children are concerned, all children are born innocent. But as part of the nature of Yahweh is goodness and loving kindness, so also is that part of his nature, the part that says that the sins of the fathers will be passed on to subsequent generations until those sins are stopped. So what a child that is born in this world today has to face is what is heaped upon him by his parents. And his parents determine, the course of his life. How many athletes have we seen where parents took an active role in preparing them for some particular sport early on in their life? That's where they became. That's what they became. That's where they went. And it's the same way in preparing a child to follow Yahweh. If we capture them early and we capture their trust, we enable them to trust us, which is not hard to do with a child because they're inherently born to trust. And if we don't extinguish that trust, if we develop it and cause it to flower, then when that child becomes of age, when he's responsible for his own choices, he's going to make the right choices.
Good. That's an adequate answer. I have a note, behavior. Your preaching focuses a lot, obviously you got to be aware of it, on behavior rather than belief.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
I'm not a preacher, and I am not in any way trying to do anything but present the truth of the scriptures in the same way that Yahweh has presented himself to me in these words. I didn't write the words, okay? He is the author of these words, and in his authorship, behavior is prominent.
Okay, I agreed. My question is about the message rather than the messenger. And the message that I hear associated with your work is heavily focused on what people do. And I thought you might want to expand that. We already have begun.
Well, what we do is going to determine what choices we make, what we give ourselves to is what we serve. And what we serve is what we worship. This is evidenced in both the words of Yahweh in Deuteronomy and the words of Yeshua in Matthew. And he reinforces that fact.
All right, another jump in topic. Now I'm looking at the life of Yeshua as a model for me. and there's clear reference to he learned obedience through the things that he suffered. Well, normally I think about his suffering as at the end of his life where he suffered terribly, but there's not much learning going on there. So what would you use as examples of his day by day suffering?
Well, when he was in the wilderness and he was tempted. I know Christianity says that Satan came to him and blah, blah, blah. But he was born a man, just like you and me. He was no different. When he opened his eyes at birth, he didn't know any more than you or I did. He learned about the Father. He learned about the ways of Yahweh. And as he learned of those ways, he discovered that, just like we do, that if we keep his words in all these circumstances, we learn more of him. He becomes revealed to us in a larger, more expansive way. And so, I mean, when he was in the wilderness, you know, he was tempted. He'd been out there for 40 days, and the scripture said he hungered. And he looked at that rock and he said, you know, the thought came to him, you can turn that rock into a piece of bread. And that was a temptation for him because he was hungry. But he said, no, the Father says, man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of Yahweh. See, he was quoting the words of Yahweh, and that reinforced him. And at each step, when he was tempted with each thing, he answered that temptation with the words of Yahweh. He chose in that moment, in that circumstance, to not only speak them aloud, but then to pursue them with his behavior. And at the end of that passage, it says that the Father sent angels to him to minister to him and to provide him the sustenance that he needed.
I've often wondered why the 40 days in the wilderness. It was something to prepare him for his ministry. Was he asked to do it? Did he choose to do it? Can you add anything? There's not much written about it.
It says that he was led by the Father's Spirit into the wilderness.
Okay.
And I don't think when he set off on that journey, he had any idea how long he was going to be out there.
Okay. I'm glad you brought that scripture up. I had forgotten it. Okay, I understand now better how he learned through the things he suffered. Now here we go again. Into your hands I commit my spirit, not being. So what word should I use here?
I think I corrected it into being.
Okay, let's assume you did and move on to something else.
Well, I do want to say something here about spirit. There are people that believe that we have our own individual spirit.
Right.
But that is Greek think. That's not Yahweh's think. If you read into Plato's New Republic, you will find the catchphrase, word for word, that man is made of spirit, mind, and soul, or body, or those
spirit, soul, and body, I think.
Yeah. And those early fathers of Christianity became enamored with Greek think, and you'll find a lot of that Greek think was incorporated into their writings, which ultimately got transferred into the scriptures. But you won't find that in Hebrew. In Hebrew, there is the Shema. There is one Spirit, and his name is one. And that Spirit is Yahweh. That Spirit is not somebody else. When Adam disobeyed, his spirit the spirit of the Father within him died, and it wasn't passed on to subsequent generations. Subsequently, when Noah repopulated the earth with his sons, there was no spirit that was connected there. It's only Yahweh who is spirit. Now, if he breathes that spirit of life into us, that breath of life that becomes his spirit, and as long as we attend to that spirit and keep it viable within us by keeping his words, then we have his spirit in us. But we don't have an individual spirit. When we die physically, we're just dead.
Okay, I accept we're dead, but I got to press a little harder on this idea of spirit.
Okay.
Isn't there some verbiage about there are many spirits out going into the world, or in the Messianic writings?
Yeah.
So you got evil spirits.
Right.
Where'd they come from? Are they alive because they had the Father's spirit? Or
No. That was, if you go back to Genesis 6, you'll find that something happened between the sons of God and the women of men, and they produced this race of people who were not, they were both human and spirit. The Nephilim is what they're called. Because they were spirit, they were able to hover above the flood until the waters receded, and then they came back and began to inhabit animals and people. And they are with us to this day. Yeshua dealt with them all the time.
I know he dealt with demonic spirits, but I have to think about where they come from. You've given an explanation. In our language, we have familiar expressions like, oh, she has a sweet spirit, or he has an angry spirit. What's that all about?
Well, that comes from the tradition of men that we all have individual spirits, and that was promoted primarily by Christianity.
So you're saying that how about the spirit of a dog and a cat and a leopard?
The dogs and cats and leopards don't have spirits.
Oh, they have life.
They have life. And as long as they live according to the precepts of the Father, some have longer lives, some have shorter lives. But the life that they have is the same as the life of any individual who is apart from Yahweh. There's only, again, I didn't write the book. Yahweh says that there is one Spirit, and his name is one. It's the Shema. And if you start dialing in different spirits, then you are completely obliterating what he's saying.
Okay, all right. What's the evidence that the Father doesn't know the future, other than the logic that that man is given free will? Is there anything I can lean on to strengthen that statement? That Father doesn't know the future? I mean, he knows the end from the beginning. There's a lot of...
He knows. You're correct. He knows the beginning from the end. That means he knows what happened in the beginning, and his purpose about the end will come to pass as he declared it. But in between, he didn't know every in and out of everybody. He can't possibly, because if we have free will and choice, when I come to an intersection, I've got 3 different ways, 4 to choose where I'm going to go. And sometimes, I know in my life, I just picked one. There wasn't any rhyme or reason to it. I just picked one. And he can't possibly know the future when we are involved in it.
Okay, you're doing such a good job. I might even get to the end of my questions here. But here's a good one. On the stake, Yeshua said, "It is finished." What is finished?
The promise of the Father, his part in the promise of the Father. He kept the Father's words right to the end, and it cost him his life. And thus, he finished his work in it.
Well, that works easily for me because I understand Yeshua is the fulfillment of the Father's original plan.
The resurrected Yeshua is the fulfillment of that plan.
Good, good.
What happened, his death on the cross is secondary in importance. The primary purpose for him dying is to be resurrected as the kinsman redeemer to the household of Israel, to bring life out of the death that they had been consigned to by the first Hebrew, Adam.
Well, you know, the message of the stake or the message of the cross, I'm still learning it. And the idea that he was obedient to the Father is really exemplified to the point that he would surrender his will to the Father's will for that excruciating experience. It's almost overwhelming.
And you see, he had a choice in that. He didn't have to do that. When he was in the garden, he said, "Father, if there's any way this can pass from me, it'd be nice. Nevertheless, your will be done." But it also said that he had 6,000 angels, 6,000 legions of angels at his beckoning that would be able to come and rescue him. All he had to do was say the word, but he didn't. He chose he understood the purpose of the Father. He understood how difficult it would be for him to accomplish that. And what he accomplished in his death was that his earthly body was pristine, in that he kept the words of the Father. There was no sin involved in anywhere in his life. So when he was laid in that tomb, he was the perfect receptacle for the Father to come and breathe that breath of life, his Spirit, back into him and resurrect him out of that tomb. Yeshua didn't resurrect himself. That was the Father's doing.
Excellent. I've got another question here, but I'm going to have to read some of the text so it can be formed. It's in the last paragraph. "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest." The testing we endure is not to punish us, but to see if we will keep the words of the Father, both of what is written and what he speaks to us. Most people really don't believe he speaks to us, or not sure of what the idea that forms in your head, where it comes from. But then you go on to say these 2 separate, distinct phases. I think that's where my question is. Yahweh and the faithfulness of the faith of Yeshua exhibited. I don't get the idea here.
I'm not sure what your question is.
Me either. You referring to 2 separate, distinct phases. and I'm looking at the previous sentences, do you notice the distinction between keeping the commandments of Yahweh and the faithfulness of the faith that Yeshua exhibited? I'm missing something in your writing.
It was in the keeping of the Father's words that he exhibited that faithfulness. He became faithful by manifesting the words of the Father.
Okay, I think the two phases then are the effort and the result. I'm trying to find other words that make sense to me.
The choices and then the behavior. He chose to keep the Father's words, but then he manifested that behavior in his life.
Well, you know what, Harold? This has never happened before. I don't have any more questions.
What are we going to do? What are we going to do?
Let's give the listeners a break and shut it down.
Well, we thank you for investing with us and staying with us to the end of this discussion. Again, please read the article. It's just got more in it than we can possibly cover, even with Jim's lack of questions in this discussion. And so until next time, I would just like to say, Shalom.